and this is why I don't talk to people while I'm on vacation. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainely Movies. As part of my coverage of the 2023 Sundance Film Festival, today I'm going to be talking about the 2023 sci-fi horror film Infinity Pool. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content like reviews, rank lists, and trailer reactions. All my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and some tailored film recommendations, so be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all of that extra content. Infinity Pool stars Alexander Skarsgård, Mia Goth, and Cleopatra Coleman, and was directed by Brandon Cronenberg. It tells the story of a couple staying at an island resort who find themselves involved in a crime and the very unique criminal justice system of this island. Heading into Sundance, Infinity Pool was one of my most anticipated movies. This was partly because it was one of the films I knew the most about, already having a theatrical release date fast approaching, but I was also interested because of the director, Brandon Cronenberg. There's the obvious fact that he's the son of the famed body horror director David Cronenberg, but Brandon is already an established filmmaker in his own right. I found his formerly most recent film, Possessor, really interesting, so I was hopeful that this newest follow-up would be just as compelling. Although the R-rated cut is what's been released in theaters now, I actually saw the NC-17 cut at Sundance, which was a bit more graphic. There were quite a few walkouts for this one during the screening. In addition to Brandon Cronenberg's involvement, the premise was what really drew me to this film initially. It, and the first trailer, were vague as expected, but the idea of a tourist couple getting into trouble while on vacation sounded like the type of realistic enough story that could generate some genuine anxious thrills, and it does. At first. The film doesn't waste much time, jumping right into the stressful, vacation-gone-wrong horror story that it promised. There's some unique world building, some creepy sci-fi stuff, a bit of dark humor, and the introduction of quite a few themes, revolving around topics as wide-ranging as tourism, writer's block, peer pressure, and criminal consequences. Unfortunately, despite its interesting premise and ideas, Infinity Pool just doesn't really go anywhere. The premise setup that draws you in is only relevant for about 45 minutes. By the middle of the second act, the intrigue of that story starts to fizzle out, devolving into repetition. Even the themes, ideas, and questions that it raises are largely left unexplored, only covered at the most cursory, shallow levels. It's a surprisingly insubstantial film, both story-wise and thematically. Instead, this film prioritizes visuals and shock value over story or character. Much like the plot, the visual stage setting is very effective. Between the creepy masks, red-hued lighting, and the axis tilt camera work, Infinity Pool starts off on an unsettling note that attempts to prepare you for what's to come. But there's really not very much that can prepare you, at least for the NC-17 cut that I saw. I'm familiar with both the Cronenberg's works, so I knew we would be treated to some gnarly body horror, but unlike their other films, these visuals rarely serve the story. There's a lot of sex, gore, and the entire gamut of bodily fluids, but these things mostly come across as shock for the sake of shock, a distraction, attempting to divert our attention away from the underdeveloped story. While it's far from a bad or poorly made film, Infinity Pool is an underwhelming one. It's a twisted, bloody trip into manipulation and depravity, with some impressive technical elements, but the story and attempts at social commentary are noticeably lacking. Much like its namesake, Infinity Pool gives the false sense that there's a lot more there than there truly is. Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. Pro number one is the premise. I don't want to spoil the sci-fi elements here, so I'm going to keep this vague and restricted to what was revealed in the trailer, but this movie had a strong starting point for its story. Nightmare vacations are nothing new, but I think the concept of being charged with a crime in a foreign country is kind of a universally stressful and scary thing. There's an uncertainty there, and this movie throws you right into the most extreme of that. Combine that with some of the themes and ideas presented early on in the film, and you've got the makings of an interesting and anxiety-inducing thriller. The second pro is the style. So I'm not really talking about the body horror or the tonal approach here, but rather the technical elements. Things like the sound design, cinematography, basically the visual and sonic aesthetic at play. The lighting and use of blues and reds throughout this film helped to establish a very interesting look to the movie. The Dutch angles and axis tilt moving camera at the beginning also really helped to set up the off-kilter and unsettling nature of the story. Even the chaotic editing adds to this, though that particular aspect gets a little excessive at times. Although many of the things we see in this movie are not pleasant to experience or watch, it's still a very good-looking and technically well-made film. On the con side, the biggest issue is the story progression, or perhaps more accurately, lack thereof. After the previously mentioned strong premise and opening to the story, the progression and intrigue just stall out. Things happen, events occur, but they don't really move the story along. Once we get into the shock and debauchery section of the film, things get very repetitive. There is a conclusion to the story, so it's not like we're missing the third act or anything, but from a plot perspective, this film is really lacking once we move into the second half. Con number 2 is how underdeveloped this film is. I realize this can also apply to the first con if we're talking about the story specifically, but this underdeveloped quality really applies across the board. This film introduces a whole slew of interesting themes and ideas early on. Tourism, political corruption, the inequities within the criminal justice system. Tons of ideas are thrown out there and appear as though they're going to be explored and commented on, but they're almost all just briefly glossed over. So it's a movie that has a lot it wants to say, but doesn't actually get around to saying much of it. Instead, throwing body horror and bodily fluids at us rather than development. Before I give you my rating and recommendations, I want to remind you that if you're interested in buying Infinity Pool or any of the other films I mentioned today, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you could use them if you're in the market for any of these movies. I'm gonna give Infinity Pool 3 out of 5 paws. It's got a compelling premise, committed performances, and very striking visuals, but the story and themes are underdeveloped, over-relying on its shock value to push the film along, ultimately making it feel as shallow and never-ending as its namesake Pool. I would recommend Infinity Pool to fans of Brandon Cronenberg's work, or of his father's. This still has the sci-fi leaning body horror you'd expect from either of them, but it's a bit more visually experimental. If you're drawn to this for the premise, just be aware that it's not really the focus of the film. It's more visually and vibe-driven than it is story-driven. If you liked Infinity Pool, I would recommend Possessor. This is Brandon Cronenberg's second film, and features some more unsettling, gory body horror, a very interesting body-based sci-fi premise, and some more striking visuals. If you liked the unique criminal justice system in this film, or the lack of criminal consequence, you might want to check out The First Purge, which is, confusingly, the fourth film in the Purge franchise, for some more criminal chaos and attempts at social commentary. And if you just want another recent film that features some dark humor and a vacation-based eat-the-rich mentality, you should watch Triangle of Sadness. Although it's not a body horror film, there is a very memorable scene featuring a literal smorgasbord of bodily fluids. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen Infinity Pool? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, what's your favorite Cronenberg film? Either Cronenberg. Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insight, or information out of this review, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe while you're at it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies, the way life should be.